And now we bring you Killer Wives, episode 28, Car Bomb. These are the case facts against Pamela Phillips, who had her husband blown up. Isn't trust a bitch? Tucson, Arizona, famous for the Sonoran Desert, the birthplace of comedian Gary Shandling, but also made famous by the murder of one Mr. Gary Triano.
Negative K, nothing further, just see the cab in the corner.
Tucson, Arizona has an average temperature of 100 degrees. It is one of the hottest places to call home, but the economy was even hotter for Mr. Gary Triano back in the 1990s as a multi-millionaire real estate investor. Gary was an early investor in the Indian casino and gambling business, long before the U.S. government granted him self-rule in that industry. Back then, there was more money to be made in investing than at the slot machines, roulette table, or craps. That is, until he flew too close to the sun and ended up losing all of his chips, only to declare bankruptcy. It was around this time that his socialite wife began to feel the itchings of divorce. Gary married Pamela on October the 4th, 1986 in San Diego, California. They soon had 2 children together, a son Trevor and a daughter Louise. Along with Gary's 2 kids from his first marriage, they made one big happy family, or so one would think. Gary Triano and his wife Pamela Ann Phillips were for a time the toast of Tucson, Arizona's social scene. Gary was celebrated for being a high-powered real estate developer, and she, his beautiful blonde trophy spouse. As a rich, glamorous couple during Tucson's real estate boom, Gary and Pam both lived a life of boundless luxury that one could only dream of. Their spare time was spent socializing with the city's business elite and visiting world celebrities, including a pre-presidential Donald Trump and his wife at the time, Marla Maples, as seen here. Anyone that knew Pamela at the height of their marriage knew that she enjoyed the money, that she was in it for the money. Now, if the money was good, which it was, you could be assured that Pamela was going to stick around. Unfortunately, life always steps into all happy situations involving money, and Tucson's building boom didn't last. As a matter of fact, it went bust. But neither did Pam and Gary's marriage. Now, this didn't sit well with Pamela, who had stopped working after the birth of her children. And though her husband had helped her open up her own business, which was an online business, he helped her launch a short-lived astrology website called starbabies.com. Now, she was used to the comforts of being a millionaire's wife, and she did not want to give up that. And Triano was on his way to losing his millions, and she couldn't take that either. By September of 1992, the couple with an outlook to the future took out a $2 million life insurance policy on Gary's life. This is usually the part of the story where men are cautioned, do not do this if you don't trust your wife. The couple's 2 children were to be the beneficiaries, but Pamela would ultimately be the administrator. Now, in other words, the money would ultimately end up in Pamela's hands. This smooth move on Pamela's behalf took the stress off of her financial concerns, so no longer would she have to worry about money in the future. It would be there. So having secured future protection against wealth loss, Pamela no longer needed Gary as a husband, or in other words, Gary became more valuable dead to her than alive. At this point, Pamela began to check out emotionally in the marriage. She didn't need it anymore.
You're watching M&N, the men's channel.
She began to exhibit a behavior that many wives do in the march to remove their husbands from their home and take their possessions of the family's wealth. And you would have seen this if you watched this channel many times in Killer Wives, Assault on Manhood, or other shows. This is a normal modus operandi of these particular wives. Now, during the month of September 1993, in a calculated move, Pamela sought the first of 3 restraining orders against Gary. She claimed that he harassed and threatened her. Now, this very old trick that allows a wife to remove her husband from the home with the hands of local law enforcement and sets the stage for what would come next in just about any home this trick is played. So with Gary now safely out of his own home, Pamela filed for a divorce that same November, only 2 months after filing her bogus restraining order. See, as I said before, it all falls in line. It all goes in steps. Now, she could assure that the house, as well as any alimony and child support, could be secured to finance her continued lifestyle. She wanted to still be wealthy, even though his economy was crashing. Now, the couples ultimately divorced that same year under less than amicable decisions. This left Gary Triano holding the bag in a down economy with no other choice but to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And he did not have her there to help him, a woman who promised to love, honor, and cherish. In 1994, with the bottom out of the market, Gary owed more than $40 million in debts, with assets of only $1.8 million. Gary had been named in at least 54 civil actions at the time, many of which accused him of non-payment of bills and defaulting on loans he could no longer afford to pay. The man was in mental stress and anguish trying to make ends meet. Now, adding to his troubles, Triano's separation from Pamela Phillips had turned nasty. Before finalizing their divorce in late 1993, the couple filed numerous restraining orders against one another. And after the split became official, they fought bitterly over the child support and visitation rights of the children. And you see this a lot of times in relationships when they break up. Now, this is especially after Pam moved with the couple's 2 children to Aspen, Colorado, without telling Gary. I think she merely moved there in line with what she's next about to do in trying to take Gary's life. But it's Pamela's next move, besides distancing herself from Gary, that will shock most anyone. Pamela Phillips, the ex-wife of multimillionaire Gary Triano, hired her former boyfriend, a one Mr. Ronald Young, to put out a hit on her husband. Now, if you have watched Killer Wives' previous episodes, you will know that most of these wives hire boyfriends to kill their husbands, which is actually the father of their children. So I need a guy to come in, would you kill my husband, and maybe while you're here, wash the windows and fix the gutters. Now, Ronald Young had an extensive background with weaponry and especially of explosives. The former lovers decided that they would plan a place and a time in which they would kill Gary with a homemade pipe bomb, and a rather large one. So on the afternoon of November 1, 1996, Gary Triano had spent a relaxing day doing what he loved to do best. In fact, he had just finished a round of golf at the exclusive La Paloma County Club in Arizona in its Catalina foothills. Now, before that, everything went just fine. He didn't have a problem. And that day he was heading home after the golfing. Now, Gary, over the last few days of his life, had been hanging around his old haunts to take the pressure off of being without the riches that had got him where he was in life at that particular point. But Gary was now broke and not welcome in places that normally threw the doors wide open at his arrival. And if you've gone through this particular COVID economy and lost your job, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. His membership at the prestigious golf course was about to be revoked for non-payment of dues. Now, as he walked towards the parking lot, he was reminded of the fact that he would be leaving in an older model borrowed Lincoln Town car to head home. Now, what he didn't know was all of his close friends, the people who still stick with you when you lose everything, were awaiting him at his house. They were throwing him a surprise party for his impending 53-year-old birthday. But unfortunately, Gary would never make that birthday. As Gary slides into the driver's side of the town car, he notices a blue canvas bag on the passenger seat of that particular vehicle. Now, that bag was not there before when he got in the car before he went to play golf. Gary buckled his seatbelt. Then he leaned over to look inside of that canvas bag. An explosion of the roof off of the car occurred. Someone with a nearby remote control detonated a pipe bomb filled with a pound of gunpowder, killing Gary instantly. The explosion blew open his skull and sent fragments of the car flying more than 100 yards away from the vehicle. Some pieces even landed in the golf club's swimming pool. Now, in the wake of Triano's murder, his ex-wife Pamela Phillips came into a lot of money fast, and I wonder where she got it from. Now, just as soon as the ink dried on the request for payment from Pamela's pocketed $2 million from the life insurance policy she took out on her husband just a couple of years prior. Now, the policy named their 2 children as beneficiaries, but Pam was their trustee. Even after their bitter divorce, Pam kept up payments on that particular policy. Now, Mr. Triano himself, while he was alive, tried to cancel that policy, but because Phillips, his wife, technically owned it, he was unable to make changes to it without her consent. Amazing how somebody can take out an insurance policy on your life and then collect on that policy. In October 1996, a month before Triano's death, police in Yorba Linda, California found a van that had been rented and abandoned by a man named Ronald Young, the same Ronald Young that planted the explosives. Now, he was wanted in Aspen, Colorado on check forging and fraud charges. Inside of that particular van, they found a taser, a shotgun, a series of documents related to Gary Triano himself, including a list of his known associates and what cars they drove. So he knew that particular car. And copies of Gary's divorce decree from Pam. Now, there was also a receipt of a Ramada Inn near Triano's house. Watch out. Young has spent almost 3 weeks there following and observing his daily habits prior to setting the bomb to kill him. Now, in Aspen, Colorado, Young had lived next door to Phillips and worked for her astrology website. Police also found letters in Young's abandoned apartment and indicating that he and Miss Phillips were lovers. Now, in most of these cases, they deny it, and she would later deny this at her trial. So, though police began to suspect that Pamela Phillips had enlisted Young to help kill Triano, they had little more than circumstantial evidence. This particular case baffled police and baffled investigators. When you explode a car and send fragments that many directions, it's hard to put the case together. To make matters worse, they had no idea where Young was. This case would grow cold over a decade until authorities would finally get a lead on where the pair ended up after killing him. So after several years in hiding, Mr. Young was finally arrested. Sheriff Clarence Dupinick of Pima County in Arizona said authorities believe that Miss Phillips first flew to London and then caught a flight to Milan. Now, Italy, she wanted to hide, they said. He said she then flew on to Switzerland with her newfound wealth, where her trail was lost after fleeing Aspen in the year 1996. This woman had plenty of money and plenty of places to hide without coming above board. Now, in 2005, the television show America's Most Wanted ran a segment on the Triano murder, asking for information on the location of Ronald Young. He was found living under an assumed name in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So when police searched his residence, they found an illegal firearm, which resulted in his spending 10 months in federal prison. So they may not be able to cause him for murder just yet, but they could lock him up and prevent him from fleeing once again. So when authorities arrested Young, they seized computers, dozens of CDs, and a digital recorder. On them, they discovered spreadsheets, emails, and notes showing that Pam Phillips had paid him over $400,000 So out of the $2 million, she paid him $400,000 to kill her husband, Gary Triano. Never leave a paper trail when you're trying to kill somebody. They even found multiple recordings he had made of them discussing the payments and alluding to the murder itself. Dumb and Dumber. In October 2008, Young and Phillips were indicted in Triano's death. In April 2010, Young was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder by himself. He was later sentenced to 2 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, which is exactly where you belong when you destroy somebody in a car of that magnitude. Now, his wife Pamela Phillips saw the writing on the wall when Young was arrested in 2005 and fled to Europe in September of 2008, a month before her own indictment came down. So she was getting out of there. She was not going to be hemmed up like he was. About 14 months later, she was arrested at an upscale hotel in Vienna, Austria, and later extradited to the United States to stand trial for the murder of her ex-husband. Ex-husband, they had already divorced, but she thought this guy should be dead because she wanted to hit the mega lottery. In April 2014, 18 years after his death, she was also found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. A month later, she was sentenced to spend the remainder of her natural life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is exactly where you belong when you plan the demise of your former spouse. Upon hearing her sentence, she cried out, "I am innocent! I am innocent! I am innocent," 3 times, she said, towards the jury, the judge, and the gallery behind her. Now age 67, Miss Pamela Ann Phillips, a one-time model, real estate agent, and a socialite that was able to sit with Donald Trump, was charged with orchestrating her ex-husband's death. She currently is serving out her sentence at Perryville State Prison outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Pamela claims that her husband, Gary Triano's death was a mob revenge killing. That's who blew up the car, not me. Mr. Ronald Young, who did the assassination, was hired by Phillips as a hitman.
You're watching MNN, the Men's Channel.
Like I said before, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Testimony focused on explosive evidence, including remnants of canvas bag, batteries, wood fragments, and wood screws recovered from the scene. Now, next time you plan on killing somebody, you might want to get rid of this stuff to start with, or don't do it at all. So expert witnesses from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were called to the stand on the trial. For the first time during the trial, ATF agents presented the reconstructed replica of the pipe bomb, which they say was used to kill Triano. Now, the bomber would have been in line of sight, so if he wanted to blow up the car, he had to be in line of sight of the vehicle. And extended an antenna, they said, if he wanted to get further away. Now, not necessarily having to enter it all the way. Now, obviously, that draws a lot of attention. So the ATF explosive enforcement, Anthony Mays, said, referring to the remote control replica he had reconstructed. So this is like one of the first pipe bombs in this particular country where the guy used a remote control for a pipe bomb. Now, the explosive enforcement officer also testified that he had never seen a Futaba system. Now, this is a remote control explosive device prior to this particular investigation, as I said before. Now, also shown in court was the actual life insurance policy documents Philip took on Triano's behalf. So next time you plan on killing your husband, don't do it, ladies. For Killer Wives, this is Charles Rivers. We thank you for joining us.